Okay, I think we will go ahead and begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 7th session of Sustainable Infrastructure, Putting Principles into Practice. We are delighted to have you with us. I am Elizabeth Losses from Duke University's Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions. And I'd like to start with just a few logistical comments. Can we have the next slide, please? So please know that today's session is being recorded and your attendance is consent to be recorded. Please do mute yourself during the main part of the presentation. At the very end, you will have a chance to speak to the speakers directly, but for the rest of the time, please mute yourself, and of course, during the breakout session. Take a moment to rename yourself in Zoom. If you didn't see that last screen, you can do it with the 3 right buttons on the top. Would love to see your affiliation or your country. And use the chat function for any technical issues. We will be monitoring the chat, but also for questions. If during any of the presentations, some questions come to mind, go ahead and put them in the chat. We will try and answer them during the session, or if not, we will put answers in the chat or get back to you later. And we will be having a post-session survey. We really appreciate when folks answer this. It helps us try and make these sessions better. Also, if you finish the post-session survey, you will get a certificate of attendance for attending today's event. And that will be available starting at about the hour point. And then finally, we are going to send a link in the next few days to everybody who is registered for the event that will have a link to the recordings, and any of the links or resources mentioned during today will be available in that, as well as the chat. So don't worry about writing them all down now. We'll be sending them to you soon. So with that, I would like to also acknowledge all of our host institutions. And we, as with other sessions, we will be using the Mentimeter polling to get some feedback from you and input during the session. So we're going to be putting in the chat the link. If you could, on your computer or on some separate device, click this. The link is in the chat now. And we are going to start with 2 practice questions. The first one is, what is a word you would use to describe your profession? And the second one is, where are you in the world? So if you could just take a moment right now, and we'll show you the results. Joe Price, who's our next speaker, will show you the results in a couple of moments. So it's just a reminder, this is part of a year-long series, monthly series, where with the objectives of exchanging state-of-the-art knowledge on how to plan and build sustainable infrastructure. And this is the link to the series if you want to go ahead and sign up for future sessions or review any of the recordings or resources from previous sessions. You can find that at this link. We're also hoping to build an interactive, it's not just to provide knowledge, but provide an interactive forum so practitioners can learn from specialists, and specialists from practitioners and from each other, primarily by looking at case studies and learning about best practices. And then finally, we're trying to build up a community of individuals and organizations. Moving forward, we have a LinkedIn group where we post materials and people can ask questions or put out information they need. Please go ahead and join this group if you have not already. So we are making our way through the UN Environment Program's Good International practices for sustainable infrastructure. And as you recall, we started the first 3 or 4 sessions. Principles were about this sort of upstream planning and strategic asset elements. And now we've moved into some of these cross-cutting issues that really affect infrastructure throughout the whole process. Last time we looked at resource efficiency and circularity. Today, we've got a really exciting topic about equity, inclusiveness, and empowerment. And I am going to, at this point, hand it over to, oh, and just as a reminder, if you missed any of those earlier sessions, they are all on our website, and they're going to be available for anyone to view anything that you've missed so far. So at this point, I'm going to hand this over to Joe Price from the UN Environment Program, who is going to tell us about today's principle. Joe?
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here again to provide an introduction to this principle number 6, which as Liz said, is equity, inclusiveness, and empowerment. So we're moving now into some of the social dimensions of sustainability. So on the next slide, you can see that this principle states that infrastructure investment must be balanced between social and economic priorities. Infrastructure should provide accessible and affordable services equitably to all, with a view to promoting social inclusion and fostering economic empowerment and social mobility and protecting human rights. It should avoid harm to communities and users, especially those who are vulnerable or marginalized, be safe, and promote human health and well-being. So if we look at the life cycle diagram then on the next slide, this is really another principle that should be embedded across all phases of the life cycle, as Liz alluded to. So this ranges from prioritization early on and weighing up the different types of infrastructure that best promote inclusion, for example, to operation later on, where safety for users and safety for workers and communities needs to be carefully managed and assessed. So we can look into these different dimensions in a little more detail on the next slide, because there are 3 kind of key components for this principle. And firstly, from a policymaking or strategic perspective, a first consideration is balancing investment between economic and social infrastructure. So economic assets like roads and power plants might typically come to mind for infrastructure for many people, whereas social infrastructure providing services such as healthcare, rule of law, or supporting culture and recreation, these are also important for inclusion, empowerment, and equity, which is the essence of this principle. However, it's worth noting that financing social infrastructure may require other sources of revenue to support it. For example, user fees from toll roads can be used to subsidize low carbon public transport, or other options can include green bonds and other mechanisms, but we'll go into some more detail on the different financing solutions in Principle 8, which covers this specifically. So then in the second part, thinking about specific infrastructure projects and systems on the ground, they should be designed so that services are delivered with equitable access. This means that benefits must reach communities, all stakeholders, and the population at large equitably, but with special attention to how women and girls and other users access infrastructure, because not all users use and access infrastructure in the same way. And then on to the third component. So while providing many benefits and opportunities, infrastructure also has the potential to directly negatively impact on communities. So at its best, infrastructure can fulfill human rights, like rights to education, but done badly, it can undermine human rights through displacement, loss of land, or loss of livelihoods. So this all means then that measures need to be put in place to counteract this tendency for adverse impacts from infrastructure to fall disproportionately on poor, more vulnerable, marginalized, and disadvantaged groups. So a specific example here is ensuring free, prior, and informed consent for building infrastructure in Indigenous peoples' lands and territories. So I think that hopefully provides you with an overview and introduction for this topic. And as always, the link for the principles is shared in the chat, and also the Sustainable Infrastructure Tool Navigator. So if people are interested to read further, please do feel free to take a look there. And we'll now, before I hand over to our technical speaker, I will just have a look at our first Mentee poll results on the screen. If Emily, you wouldn't mind sharing those. So let's have a look who's joining us today, what professions and perspectives do we have? So we've got researcher, engineer, civil engineer, economist, policy expert, real estate, so a few sectoral specialists, as well as broader policy making and engineers. So it's good, yeah, good mix here. Should make for an interesting discussion in the breakout rooms. And now, where are you in the world? Let's have a look. So we've got good representation from India by the looks of things, UK and South Africa, New Mexico, USA, a few from different parts of the USA, Jakarta specifically, Spain, Japan, Switzerland. So again, good representation. Thank you everyone for joining. So I'll now hand over then to our technical presenter, and this is Motoko Aizawa, who is president of the Observatory for Sustainable Infrastructure, which is a research organization that aims to bridge the sustainability gap of mega infrastructure development, investment, and finance through data collection and policy research. Ms. Aizawa spent more than 2 decades at the World Bank Group in various capacities, including as sustainability advisor to the World Bank Sustainable Development Network. She's the principal author of the original IFC performance standards, and she also led the creation and implementation of the Equator Principles. So really pleased to have Motoko speaking to us now. And Motoko, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph, for that very kind introduction. And I would also like to thank Elizabeth and all the colleagues at UNEP for including me in this very impressive webinar series. And greetings to all of you who are in various time zones. I'm just very happy to have a chance to present this topic, inclusiveness in particular. Just noting that we are 2 days away from the International Human Rights Day, which is December the 10th. This year, their slogan is all human, all equal. So this is a really timely topic to be for us to be discussing. The next slide, please. Thank you. So we've already seen this. We're talking about Principle 6 here, and just want to make the point that this is one of the cross-cutting topics. A lot of the things that you've already heard from the previous 6 presentations, you're going to hear an echo of it here because they are also going to be important for the social aspects. The next slide, please. So in a way, I was thinking to myself, I don't really have to present anything. I should just ask you to look at the November issue of Civil Engineering, which featured this topic of social justice and equity in infrastructure. It's a really fascinating edition, and you can Google this and have a look. There are many quotable sentences in there. I just picked one up here in the bubble. Engineers should begin to integrate the social sciences into the physical ones. And this talks to the multidisciplinary nature of infrastructure. Next slide, please. But why are we talking about inclusiveness in infrastructure, particularly at this juncture? Well, you know, we have these tsunami of events in the last few months and years, not to mention the pandemic, but also the social justice movement that happened in this country, in the USA, that spread to all over the world. Sudden revelation and re-realization of past and current discrimination, differentiated effects on women and minorities as a result of the pandemic, and the fact that this massive injection of public funds is occurring in various places, but how exactly to allocate that and where does that go? That's also part of the US infrastructure debate as well. And I really want to come back to the pandemic as a game changer. We also saw that infrastructure really needs to serve the needs of essential workers, because that's the only way the society as a whole is going to work. And so all of a sudden, we thought about transport and what it's doing to the mobility of essential workers. That's just, excuse me, one example. So I think that the pandemic really served as a clarion call for enforcing the resilience of people in society, especially resilience of the most vulnerable against future shocks and crisis. And here we're not just talking about climate shocks, we're also talking about financial crisis and future pandemic that people are predicting. Also, there are different societal needs, aging societies, especially in Asia, societies with rising youth in the Middle East, and everywhere there are unaddressed needs of women in infrastructure. So I think all of a sudden we have realized that infrastructure can play a pivotal role to promote inclusiveness. Next slide, please. So what is inclusiveness? You know, if you listen to politicians speak, they like to use the word inclusiveness. They want to talk about inclusive society, inclusive economy, inclusive education, inclusive healthcare. But it's a fuzzy term, and in part because it's got many dimensions. At the most fundamental level, it's about the absence of exclusion or discrimination. So exclusion from access to basic services, exclusion from being able to realize economic, social, and cultural rights, food, water, housing, jobs, education, healthcare, and the healthy environment. It's both an end and a means, meaning an end because it's a human rights value, but also a means because it's going to get us to many things such as social inclusion, human development, empowerment, and equity. So it's got multi-dimensions, and many of you who are experts in the environmental justice space will know that this concept of inclusion has a lot in similar with environmental justice as well. The next slide, please. So I won't go through this in detail. You can take a look at the slide later on. There are notable international documents that reference inclusiveness. For example, the G20 Principles for Quality Infrastructure Investment. Global Infrastructure Hub has an excellent resource on inclusiveness. And also UNESCAP has a very interesting approach where they talk about equality, but they also talk about inclusiveness as a means to enable green infrastructure, right? So it's a way for public to come together for an inclusive decision-making process. Next slide, please. So here's the question, how do we do this in infrastructure projects? So here are some specific project level considerations. You've already discussed earlier the importance of planning and design and the need to include sustainability considerations there in order to set the sustainability pathway of the project. Well, inclusiveness is no different. As I mentioned, sustainable infrastructure is multidisciplinary. So if a project team can involve social scientists, gender specialists, human rights experts, and others, you're gonna set yourself up for success there. It's really important to know your stakeholders and their needs and to engage early and iteratively, right? So engagement is not just at the upfront stage of the project, but throughout the life of the project. Oftentimes they have great ideas about how to provide a solution to the problems that they're experiencing. If necessary, you need to understand past and current patterns of exclusion and to ascertain how to provide appropriate redress. It's a great idea to partner with vulnerable groups and minorities. It's a win-win for them, for the project, and for inclusiveness. And finally, do make sure that your project budget is adequate to address these steps. They all cost money, as you know. And so if you can have an estimate, a line item in the project budget and have that enshrined in the project contracts, that would protect the space for all these activities to take place. The next slide, please. Now, here are some suggestions on tools to facilitate inclusiveness in infrastructure. There are some great resources like UNSCAP, Global Infrastructure Hub, and also the Sustainable Infrastructure Tool Navigator has a gender responsible infrastructure tool section. So please have a look. But basically, things that are already familiar to you: stakeholder identification and needs assessment, participatory planning, co-design, universal design, and other policy level or project level assessments. They're all gonna have a space for you to include an inclusiveness component, right? Strategic impact assessment particularly, but other instruments like human rights impact assessment, gender assessment, these are also very useful. So familiar instruments, but you need a very deliberate effort to include inclusiveness. Next slide, please. And for the policy people who are looking at this slide, here are some suggestions on how to integrate inclusiveness considerations beyond projects. So we're talking about policy capacity data. Obviously, mandating inclusiveness in policy and processes is helpful, especially during the planning and design stage, if there is space to do that. It's also very interesting to look at these inclusiveness issues through the sectoral lens, right? So I just bring up one example of digital inclusion issues and the broader sustainability human rights challenges associated with digital access. There are multiple organizations already doing this, but it's useful to have that lens. Demonstration projects, partnerships, and platforms to signal project structuring and learning to scale up inclusiveness. And in fact, this is one of the fora as well. I just bring up one example here of the Right Energy Partnership with Indigenous Peoples. It's a way to systematically partner with Indigenous peoples in renewable energy projects worldwide. And this is a replicable platform. So please have a look. And obviously, we need broader capacity for the public sector to be able to integrate inclusion in decision-making. It's the same with the private sector. And finally, we are short on indicators and data sources. And so in order for us to really integrate inclusion and understand how effective that is, we need universal data and parameters and indicators as well. So we have a lot of work in that area. So I think the next one is my final slide. Here are some resources which I think may have been already streamed through the chat spaces, and you're going to access this presentation later on and click through these examples. So with that, I finish. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Motoko. Just such an important subject for all of us, and I think you really peeled back some of the terms and made it clearer for us about what it is, what inclusiveness is, and how we can achieve it. So, if everyone, as you're kind of thinking of questions you might want to ask Motoko, we have 2 responses, opportunities to put your input and experience about how you've integrated inclusiveness and equity issues into your projects through the Mentimeter. So the first question that we're asking you is, in your past experience on infrastructure projects or systems, to what degree have the following issues been addressed? And there'll be a sliding scale for you to answer between never to always on 5 different factors. So that's the first question. And then the second question is, in your past experience on infrastructure projects or systems, when is input from a diverse community of stakeholders usually sought? And 4 options there. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think we have a couple minutes for questions for Motoko. And I see one in the chat that I'll go ahead and ask Motoko. And Biplab, if you want to come off mute and ask the question, you're welcome to. I'm going to see if I can understand it. it looks like the question is about how we can implement the kind of disclosure of stakeholders into the process of creating inclusiveness. And maybe that's around how we create it as a policy. Maybe you could mention, Motoko, some of the kind of obstacles or concerns of integrating the requirement of stakeholders as a policy objective.
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Biplatsom, I think. So I didn't really have a chance to talk about disclosure in detail. I was kind of rushing, but you know, disclosure of information is vital to inclusiveness. So you have to have equal access to information in order for you to be able to participate in consultation and provide meaningful input. So how to ensure disclosure of project information early in the process and throughout the project cycle, it is always such a huge challenge. And I think that there are several leverage points that we have experimented in the past. And the experiment is still ongoing, right? And improving, but still we have room to make more improvements. So obviously the public sector can promote disclosure of information in relation to infrastructure development and financing and operation. The World Bank has guidance on disclosure platforms that you can establish in connection with public-private partnerships of infrastructure projects. And there we're talking about the public sector pushing for projects to get this information out. We have also tried, for example, through the financial leverage. So those who are providing financing to the project, especially multilateral development banks, requiring project level disclosure before financing can be made available to projects. Mm-hmm. And so that's another way. And the third way is for the project to be able to do that on their own. A lot of them are already engaged in the practice of producing sustainable reports and engaging stakeholders. And so that is another leverage point where project is able to put information out through its established sustainable reporting mechanism or otherwise. If there are more questions on that, I can come back. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Motoko. There's another question from Greg Mentee, and it's about how to measure progress in achieving inclusiveness, diversity, and equity. What's in place now? What tools do we have to know if we've kind of achieved the ambition?
Yes. So I think that some of the tools that you're going to be able to see once you go through the list of tools already have different components of social sustainability, and some suggest indicators there, right? And I think that you can use those, or you can adapt those to specific project circumstances. And so it's easier to do that at the project level, to have KPIs and make sure that the KPIs have notable social sustainability components, inclusiveness components. I think that it is harder to aggregate all of that at the city level or municipal level, at the national level, regional, global. We are going to have several different pressure points that will make it easier for all of us to understand the key components or key indicators, SDGs, and the indicators that are suggested there. Although those are for countries at the macro level, they might be able to eventually be used specifically for inclusiveness purposes. There are many other initiatives ongoing, and part of the problem, I think, is that we may have just too many competing initiatives, and so eventually we have to aggregate these in order for these to be meaningful across the board.
Great, and KPI being key performance.
Excuse me, key performance indicators.
Great. I think, so one other question that's come up is about what options there are to include equity in project valuations. So I'm thinking about kind of the cost benefit analyses that take into social, environmental, and economic considerations. Just curious if you've seen that done well, or are there particular resources you might recommend?
Right. So I'm going to assume that evaluation here means not the tail end evaluation, but the upstream assessment process. I hope I'm right on that. So yes, there are multiple tools that public sector uses in order to understand the appropriateness of proposed infrastructure projects, cost benefit analysis being one of them. The problem with that analysis is that it's usually very focused on economic and financial factors and not enough on the environmental and social aspects. And so the key is for the cost benefit analysis to be really having a broader scope to address these costs and benefit factors coming from environmental and social side. And I think that understanding the benefits is really important just as much as understanding the cost, because people need to benefit. Yeah. So there are tools to be able to do this.
Great, thank you. And I have the last question, and then I'll share the results of the Mentee meter. You mentioned, and the article from the American Society of Civil Engineers kind of recommends this, or puts forward the need to have an equity-centered approach as we develop infrastructure projects, and that kind of translating or being reflected as a people-centered approach. And I'm wondering if you could comment on what role you think nature has to play. You mentioned that there's kind of the potential by kind of achieving an inclusive process that you can realize some green infrastructure outcomes. Just would love maybe for you to comment more on that balance.
Right. So at the end of my slide, I have included one article that I wrote for UNEP in which I analyzed the relationship between inclusiveness and green infrastructure. And the relationship is actually a mutually supporting one, right? So inclusiveness can be a means to coming to public consensus on the need for green infrastructure, how that is done in an equitable manner so that everybody benefits, right? So that's one way of figuring out the relationship. There are other ways in which green infrastructure can support inclusiveness by design, so that people who don't have access to green spaces, amenities, or other ecosystem services can be included so that they have access. There are many relationships, which I was actually surprised how complementary they are. So I think the quick answer is maybe you can take a quick look at the article. It's not too long, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll look forward to reading that. So I'm going to thank you again, Motoko, for sharing with us your perspective and experience. And Motoko will be with us for the rest of the session. So feel free to add any other questions for her into the chat. And Motoko, we welcome you to respond to those questions in the chat. So the first question here in poll 2 is, in your past experience on infrastructure projects or systems, to what degree have the following issues been addressed? So the first one is engagement of stakeholders and determination of their needs. And this looks to be the kind of element that's most addressed. And considerations of inclusiveness during the planning and design, maybe half the time. Effort to understand past and current patterns of exclusion, kind of more is less common. Participation of experts from multiple disciplines, for example, social scientists, gender specialists. It looks like we do an okay job on this, but we could be including a diverse disciplines in our project teams more often. And then how often do we have sufficient budget to address equity, inclusion, and empowerment activities? And this of all of them is kind of the lowest, which is obviously maybe the most important, to have the resources available to achieve the kind of 4 elements before. So great questions, and thank you all for your input. So the second question here is, in your past experience, when are the needs and impacts of a diverse community of stakeholders usually considered? So at the early stages of conception and strategic planning, it looks like when most of that is considered, which is great. And just to be ahead of the process and probably most effective in achieving the outcomes you are aspiring to. Less so when accidents or protests occur. And then after the planning has been largely completed, also has some. So no one answered never. So it looks like we're all in this group in the process of working to achieve these outcomes, which is great. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, next speaker, who's going to share with us a case study in applying some of these principles going forward. And so Paramita, I welcome you to share your screen. Paramita Datta Dey is a city planner with over 23 years of experience in urban development. She leads the Sustainable Cities and Water and Sanitation program at the National Institute of Urban Affairs, India. She has worked to bridge the gap between infrastructure policy and practice through the South Asia Urban Knowledge Hub, and has helped create innovation labs on urban wash solutions in Indian cities. So thank you so much, Paramita, and look forward to your presentation. And I see your screens, see your slides.
Thank you, Emily. First of all, I would like to thank the hosting team for giving me the opportunity to share this case study. It's been a pleasure to be here. So today I'm going to share some insights from a very vibrant program on sanitation in India, which is called the Swachh Bharat Mission, or the Clean India Mission, translated in English. Can you see my screen moving?
I don't see it moving. I see the cover slide.
Excuse me, I'll just try to share again. Sorry for that.
No problem.
Is it visible now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just. Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem.
To begin with, a brief snapshot of the mission. It is one of the most ambitious initiatives that was taken by the government of India and launched in October 2014, and it has a rural and an urban component. And the mission had twin objectives of making India open defecation free and achieving 100% scientific management of solid waste. And it was one of the most successful development programs, and and it was also very popular, and what it is now referred to more as a Jan Andolan, or a people's movement. So this is a representative picture of what used to be the situation in most cities in India and what it is now. And India being a diverse country, it's very difficult to have a one size fits all. So there are many, many good practices that emerged from this mission, and I'll be sharing just one of them. These are some of the statistics that highlight the success of the program. And one important part of the program is that it also included Asia's largest cleanliness survey, or Swachh Sarvekshan, as it is called in Hindi. It started with about 474 towns that were participating in the survey, and today more than 4,300 towns in India participate in it. And this created a lot of competitive spirit among the cities. Today, I'd like to take you through the case study of Ambikapur, because in this program, in this webinar, we are focusing on the principle 6 of sustainable infrastructure, which is on equity, inclusiveness, and empowerment. So let me take you through the journey of Ambikapur. Ambikapur is located in central Indian state of Chhattisgarh. It has a population of 130,000 and generates about 7.6 metric tons of segregated waste every day. Ambikapur has become very popular because it has won several awards for the last 4 consecutive years in this competition or the Sarvekshan. The model adopted by Ambikapur is a decentralized one. It's called SLRM. It is a demonstration of how, through a community-based inclusive approach, empowered women took upon themselves the task of keeping the city clean. So what happened was around 2014, Ambikapur was a typical small town in India that had to dump its waste in a dump site, and it was the municipality had engaged contractors to do so. The city in that particular year was faced with the challenge that the height of the dump site had reached its saturation limit, and it had reached dangerous levels. So there was no more land area available. So the district commissioner, who was in charge of this entire district, which is an administrative area that includes rural and urban, but Ambikapur was the main town over there, and the maximum waste was coming from Ambikapur. And she was in a fix that how does one solve that problem? She chanced upon a TV program where an expert was telling about how he did it in South India through a decentralized model. So she quickly sprung into action, talked to him, and then called upon all the stakeholders in the city and had a meeting. So what was done was a 2-pronged approach was adopted. One was to put in place a system of door-to-door collection of solid waste from all households and commercial centers, and to practice scientific processing and disposal. So in order to do so, it was decided to do the following. 1, design a community-based model, as the conventional contractor-driven model was not working. Design a model that is owned, run by women, and therefore could also provide livelihood opportunities to them. So just to put a little bit of perspective, the district collector who was heading this whole approach, she also happened to have a background in federating self-help groups, and she was also the chairperson of a group that was looking at the National Urban Livelihood Mission. So all the typical professions that can be given that, through which women could be trained, like, tailoring or setting up beauty parlors, it was kind of reaching a saturation level. And she saw an opportunity here of involving urban poor women who are not so literate or very littly, who have less levels of literacy. So the third thing was to introduce source segregation of waste that was reduce the burden on the dump site, introduce beneficiary charges so that 100% cost recovery could be achieved. And in order to do so and to make this whole thing sustainable and owned by the city, so stakeholder engagement was thought to be a very, very crucial part. So the project was divided into 2 parts. One would be the door-to-door waste collection from houses and commercial areas. And the second was the city sanitation, which included cleaning of roads and public spaces. So the first part about door-to-door collection is what was entasked with this, with the group of women. So they quickly put up a request for women to come and register to be part of a self-help group system and federation. So it was started in 17 out of 48 wards. And in the remaining wards, the contractor continued to do whatever they were doing, sort of taking unsegregated waste and dumping it at the dump site. The city quickly saw the difference, and that's how more and more people got into it. Now, what was done? First of all, when the women were called in, and they were called in for a training, they knew that there would be a lot of dropouts. So they needed 300 women. They registered more than 600 women. And when these women were given a preliminary training, it was told that they are not going to take out waste from a dump site. Rather, they're going to recover resources that was cash worthy, and they would be working in an industrial workshed. So the whole thing about perspective was very important here. They were trained not only in hard skills about segregation of waste, they were also trained in soft skills like leadership, group dynamics, teamwork, how to use safety gear, how to go, take care of their own personal hygiene. Another important component was the IEC. They connected with, or there was a Citizen Connect program that was created. More than 12,500 children were chosen as volunteers. Thought leaders, religious leaders, everybody was roped in. A mass media campaign was designed. A grievance redressal mechanism was designed. And the hard infrastructure came from viability gap funding from the municipality. Now, when all this was done, since although the project was self-driven, it was important to have a monitoring system in place and an MIS in place. So the biometric attendance of people was ensured, CCTV cameras for safety of women, daily route surveillance. The women were given training of doing billing through a digital app and a digital printer. So all this was built into the system right from the start. The hard infrastructure here is the SLRM center, which is RCC structure, and it occupies a space of 1,500 to 4,000 square feet, depending upon the space availability in every ward. Ward is a administrative boundary. And the waste is collected in a segregated manner from the household into 20 categories of dry waste and wet, that is 17 categories. Then there's a tertiary segregation center where it is further segregated into 156 categories. Then the wet waste is composted. A little bit of it is also goes to a biogas plant where there's a kitchen that feeds a lot of homeless people. Even this is done through the self-help groups. And the compost that is prepared is, of several categories. And the best one is a vermicompost. So these are some pictures showing how Ambikapur did it. And this is inside the SLRM center, how it is weighed, how the plastic is baled, how it is stored in the tertiary centers. Some glimpses, some glimpses of the IEC activities that were taken, how it was all inclusive, including everybody. And they still continue to do these IEC activities. Finally, they developed the dump site as a sanitation park. And this was done in a very short span of time. And 16 acres of dump site was remediated. And the land that was reclaimed is worth rupees 25 crores or 250 million Indian rupees. And as you can see in the picture, it has become more like a picnic spot. Another interesting thing that Ambikapur has done more recently is that they have something called a garbage cafe, where people can bring in plastic and exchange it for a coupon for a meal. So 1 kg plastic means a full meal and half kg plastic means a snack. And it's a very, very clean environment and all run through these women of the SHG groups. Now, it all sounds very hunky-dory, but of course it had its own set of challenges. And as I spoke to one of the officers who has been engaged in this whole thing right from the start, he did not take these as challenges. He said these were actually opportunities. So first thing was that they collected data. Data was not there. And this is a problem in many Indian cities. So first thing when they were planning, they collected up, accurate data of the ward-wise waste, ward-wise population. Then there were some vending zones in different wards. So, and the vendors would be different. Morning, there would be a different set of vendor. Evening, there would be a different set of vendor. And the characteristic of the waste would be different. The same vendor would be selling fruits in the morning and another would be sending, selling some beverages, coffee and all. So the waste is different. Then there were different wards had different, sort of unique stuff. There was a ward which has a hostel of a school that had a residential school of 4,000 to 5,000 students. That would generate a lot of food waste. Whereas there would be some mandis or wards where there were vegetable market. So all these nitty-gritties had to be taken care of, and for that data was very important. Then they also involved livestock to, sort of eat away the waste that can be eaten for the livestock. But not all wards had that. So they had to tie up with the fish market, with the poultry market and all those stuff. Then during the remediation of the dump site, all the SHGs were not present in all the wards, but they had to remediate the dump site quickly. And the cost that the contractor told them was 5 crore or 50 million Indian rupees. So what they did is, Ambikapur has a center of research, and there the scientists developed their own culture. And with the help of those women and the culture that was locally developed by this center, they managed to remediate the site with a cost of 1 crore or 10 million. So it's really amazing how, when we involve people and local expertise, how you could actually save on a lot of economic resources. Then reclaiming public land from illegal occupation was a challenge, because small parcels of land were required for setting up the SLRM centers. So that was not available. So they took up the most problematic garbage vulnerable point and converted that into a very, an industrial workshed of an SLRM. That impressed the people. So then it was easier to evict people and rehabilitate them from those public land. So there, as I said, it was an opportunity as well as a challenge. The leadership of the district collector was very important, but what she did was she built a very, very agile and committed team, and that team is still there. She has got transferred from there, but the team that she built, as if I can quote the officer with whom I spoke just before my presentation, he said, she told me, don't try to make sure that our work is so good that no next administrator tries to change it in any way, and just continues. And that's what they did. And the project kept getting more and more accolades. So in a nutshell, what the lesson learned is that it's a simple model, it's cost efficient, and most importantly, driven by community-based structure. People's participation is at the core. It is very much doable in terms of cost recovery. It has generated a huge number of green jobs from they call them Swachhata Didis. Didis means sister. So instead of calling them sanitary worker, they are now calling them Swachhata Didi. Swachhata means cleanliness and Didi means sister. So giving them a lot of power, empowering them, respecting them, and boosting their self-confidence is what this case study shows us. And having seen the success of this one case study, it was upscaled to 163 urban local bodies in the state of Chhattisgarh. And recently, Chhattisgarh won the first prize also in cleanliness in 2020, which was declared only last month. And in all over the state, 8,000 women have been employed. So what was attractive here was that the women got a fixed salary of about 6,000 Indian rupees, and 3,000 was variable based on the amount of waste that they were able, recycled waste, that resources that they were able to sell. Then waste management here was not looked upon as a socially despised occupation, but the whole thing about giving them soft skill, empowering them with soft skill, giving them a dress code, giving them safety gears, all of this contributed to its success. And then worker attrition rate also declined because people found pride in what they were doing. It was also very inclusive because the scrap dealers and land rag pickers that were already working in the city, they were not thrown away, they were integrated. And a survey of rag pickers was done, And the male members were allocated areas in the city where they could buy recyclables. So therefore, 100% engagement of rag pickers was ensured. Then there was a rate contract that was established with the local vendors. So the integration of the existing scrap dealers was ensured. Then in some cities, they were facing the problem of selling compost. But here what they did is they tried to upgrade the compost and rate it differently. For example, the city compost is rupees 3 a kg, which can be used for floriculture and stuff like that. Then vermi compost is what can be used in agricultural purposes. So all this was done with the help of in-house experts. And then there was a lot of convergence here. So National Urban Livelihood Mission was looking at empowering, urban poor and giving them livelihood. It did that. And the Swachh Bharat mission was looking at cleanliness. So there was direct convergence that was established through this program. And its success actually led to an evidence-based policy making. So Ambikapur is a very good example of equity, inclusiveness, and empowerment in building sustainable infrastructure. And this kind of evidence-based practice has informed the policy, and therefore the Swachh Bharat Mission 2.0, which was launched just last month, and it is going to continue for another 5 years, has integrated all these principles into the contours of its program. So with that, I would like to end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paramita. That was terrific, and what an impressive program that you all have, so much that you've accomplished. I want to, first of all, before I ask you a question, I want to remind everyone that before you leave, please fill out our post-session survey, and the link will be in the chat. And also, if you are interested in learning more about the case study we just heard about, there's a really fun and informative video also in the chat, and we will send this in the follow-up email, which describes the whole program, and it's very nicely done. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will try and answer them. Either we're only going to have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions right now before we go into the breakout session. But when we come back after the end of the formal session, in about 16 minutes, we'll have another 10, 15 minutes or so to engage with all of the speakers. So feel free to put questions in the chat right now. But I would like to just get 1 or 2 quick questions in before we do go to the chat. And that is, my first question comes back to what we heard from our technical presentation about the finances. As you clearly showed, it turns out that this model is actually economically very viable, and actually looks like it returned a profit, and obviously had a huge number of different benefits. But right from the beginning, it probably was a pretty large investment for the local governments that were running it. And so, Paramita, I'm wondering, how did they get the resources, the financial resources, to start such an ambitious project?
Yeah, so actually it was not that much of a financial resource that was required, because what happened is that the Swachh Bharat mission was launched and there was a lot of resource available for hard infrastructure. But the cost of one SLRM was not much, because it was, I don't remember the exact figure, I can of course get it for you, but it was just a shed, an RCC structure with some basic amenities. And so first they started with one SLRM, which was through viability gap funding of the municipality through this program. And all the thing was around user charges. So they each household paid rupees 50 and each shop paid rupees 100. And then the sale of compost and recyclables is what was the main source of revenue for this. So as I told you, so these were actually unemployed women. and they started receiving 6,000 rupees as a fixed salary from the municipality, which they were earlier giving to the contractors. So some of it they apportioned for this. And then 3,000 was their profit. So what up to 3,000 to 4,000, depending on how much they were able to sell in terms of wet compost or the recyclables. So first the recyclables were segregated at source. They got this at source recyclables segregated in 17 to 20 categories. And then at the tertiary center, they segregated it to 156 categories. Just to give you an example, if there was a PET bottle of bottled water, so the lid and the rim was separated. The bottle was separated. The label was separated. So this whole thing about source segregation is what was key here. And for that, the IEC activities played a very important role. So the residents segregated at one level and then the workers segregated at the other level. So right now, these earning is 38 lakhs rupees and the expenditure is 35 lakhs. So it was not very costly because they started with like a pilot of 1 or 2 SLRMs, and now there are 437 people, women workers, and there are 17 SLRM. And now it is, they're getting profits. So it was started as a pilot.
Okay, well, terrific. And also, as you say, this is a great case presentation illustrating our last principle on circular economy as well. So we're going to go ahead and break out into groups right now and answer these 2 questions, which I'll go over in a moment. Please, either while you're in your group or after in your Mentee, if you can just put some of your thoughts on these, that would be great when we come back at the very end before 1:15. The 2 questions we would like everyone to be thinking about is, 1, who should be taking the lead in promoting empowerment, inclusiveness, and equity in an infrastructure project? Is this the responsibility of governments or civil society groups or the private sector? Who do you think really should be pushing this? And then the second question is, have you, each of our participants, experiences either successes or barriers in achieving equitable outcomes in infrastructure projects or programs or systems? And so we would like people to bring forward their own personal experiences. So at this point, we're going to break out into groups. Don't forget to answer your post-session survey and put comments in the Mentimeter.
The abrupt end to the breakout room is just the worst. I'm so sorry to my group. Well, thank you all. I hope that this is just such a conversation and a topic that requires much more than 10 minutes, I think, to really, there's so much more opportunity. And I hope and envision that in the coming months and years that all of our respective diverse professions will have more opportunities to engage on these topics and become more, I think, versed in what it means to have an inclusive, equitable, and empowering infrastructure project. So I hope, like for me, this feels like just the tip of the iceberg, and I look forward to many future conversations on this topic. So thank you all. I'm going to quickly share my screen and some of the responses that we did get in the breakout groups. So the first question is, who should be taking the lead in promoting empowerment, inclusiveness, and equity in an infrastructure project? I love these answers. So we have everyone, we have government, a collective initiative of people, including both government and private sectors, and financial institutions. And I think in just scrolling through here, it definitely looks like government is maybe the one that folks think should be taking the lead the most, I guess, within of all the actors. And then, have you experienced success or barriers to achieving equitable outcomes in infrastructure projects or programs? I love that. Not yet. We're working on it, right? It's a process. And then some of the barriers, I think we talked about the access to funding, lack of social science or capacity of the team, you know, lack of understanding or valuing of what equity means and its importance. And here's a specific initiative. I look forward to reading that has been able to achieve equitable outcomes, and some barriers around corruption, which is a reality for many of us. Okay, so thank you all again for providing your input to the Mentee meter and the breakout rooms. And it's, you know, the close of this session, I want to queue us up for next month, and this will be on Principle 7 around enhancing economic benefits from our infrastructure projects. So these are social, environmental, economic benefits, and how we can optimize projects to achieve those. So we're going to hear a technical presentation from the International Labor Organization about a tool that they've developed to measure job creation, which we know is an important element of the economic benefits a project can generate. And then our case presentation will be from a professor at the Ubon Ratchathani University in Thailand, and really focus on a re-evaluation of benefits accrued from hydropower projects, and a realization that they weren't generating the benefits that they were originally planned. So looking forward to both of those. And that will be not on December 8th, that will be in January. So please check out the website for the correct date for that. And we hope you have a wonderful end of year and beginning of the next year. We'll see you again in January. And as always, we have kind of an informal tradition of staying until the middle of the hour, wherever you are, to just answer questions or continue the conversation. So welcome you to stay with us. And if you haven't already, please do fill out our post-session survey. We really find that feedback useful to improve our sessions, and it's great to get your input. So with that, I will close, and thank you all again for joining us.
Thank you also to the speakers. And if anyone, I know our session got cut off early. If anyone would like to pick up, but in particular ask any of our three speakers today any questions, or feel free to write them in the chat if you're more comfortable doing that. I am going to just start off with a question for Paramita. Have you all been tracking the women who were unemployed and came into your project and have since left? Have you tracked to see if they were able to progress in their careers?
The city administration has been tracking the projects that the women that are already there, like there are 447 women. The ones that dropped off, I'm afraid there is no database that is tracking them. And most of the time, these women have dropped off due to family reasons, like the family was not very happy about them working in the waste sector, or they could not manage the work-life balance. There was more need for them to be a caregiver, so they were not able to etch out that time to get involved in these kind of activities. So I'm afraid, yeah, that's a good question, and maybe I should give the city administration the feedback about whether the fact that they should track the dropouts and how they can be nudged to, get into some kind of livelihood activities. Thank you for that. Elizabeth, you're muted.
Thank you. Feel free to raise your hand or just speak up, but until I see another question, I've got lots. So I'm going to ask Motoko a question. If there you are on my screen. So in our breakout session, we talked about the frustration of how to track whether these various social parameters are actually being achieved, and how to say, put in a grant proposal or a project proposal, what will be done to monitor and track the success. And I know you've put several different resources in your talk, and we will share them, but do you have any particular suggestions to the participants about, gosh, if I could do anything, I would look at this one site or this one tracker? What have been most successful in your experience, Motoko, as to this question? I know it's a big question, but any other thoughts you have on it, I think would be welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that question. I just want to take a moment, though, to say thank you, Paramita. I really enjoyed your presentation. I thought it was really powerful in that the initiative came from the grassroots level, and such a humble thing, a humble problem, but a big problem for the city, right? And you were able to connect all the stakeholders that are necessary to run this program. And then you had data at the end, because you're tracking all that data, because you knew what you wanted to know, I think, from the outset. And so it's an amazingly comprehensive presentation. And then I want to come to this data or the indicator question. It's difficult to know upfront what it is that you're going to track, in a way, right? And it's really challenging when you're making grant proposals and whatnot, that this is the thing that we're going to achieve. So I think necessarily for the success of the project, you're going to be tracking this, but the tracking, the measures might change over time, and that is okay. Obviously, if you need to know what you need to track at the outset, you're going to have all the things that you're going to assert vis-a-vis the funders about the objectives of the project, and you can derive the indicators from that. That's just a simple deduction process. But I just want to mention one tool that I had some a hand in helping create, and that is the UN Economic Commission on Europe, UNECE. They have this sustainable impact assessment tool, and they have various components in there, including the social components, which I think are fairly well designed. And just looking at tools like that upfront to see what are they saying are the sort of key parameters that you're going to have to hit on the social side. And then specialize in your indicators, because these are something that your stakeholders are asking to know over time, or the funders are going to want to know, or the government agency is curious and tracking. And so obviously it will change, but using a tool like the UNEP tool, also just thinking about what's in the SDG indicators, right? So those are things to just get you going.
Hope you're on mute, Liz. But we can almost read your lips, but not quite well.
We have a question in the chat, and I'm wondering if Monsi, excuse me if I'm saying this wrong, Monsi Albin wants to ask it directly, or we could read it out. Would you like to ask the question?
Yeah, sure. And you did pronounce it perfectly. Thank you. So, I wanted to talk to ask Motoko about the journey, and I was assuming that it's been a long journey from the inclusion of this topic into the infrastructure project design. So I wanted to know what have been the main accomplishments, the main battles gained on this journey.
Thank you, Monty, for that question. I feel like we should at least have coffee and chat about it, if not like share a bottle of wine and spend all night talking about it. It's that kind of thing. You know, I'll just say one thing. It's a tremendous thing for UNEP, right, to be sponsoring this conversation. To their credit, it's a tremendous thing for UNEP principals on sustainable infrastructure to have a principle on inclusion, equity, empowerment. And of course, their principles are being set out because UNEP has this mandate to set these principles for the whole of the UN, and necessarily they have to consider the social aspects just as much as environment. But it turns out that these are truly mutually supportive. And so in a way, I'm not telling you about the whole journey, I'm just telling you about where we are. But I think that is a tremendous thing for this UNEP platform to have a space for us to be able to have this conversation. And so Monty, I'm not really answering your question in a way, because these are all our personal journeys, I think, right? And people who are encountering barriers on the environmental side, well, the barriers are actually very similar on the social side: lack of funds, lack of budget allocation. It's something that we experience. You know, we want to hold a consultation and find out there's nothing in the budget to enable us to do that consultation. I think we've all been in that space. And so it's important for the project to be able to say upfront, look, we need to do this. It's actually for the improvement of the project. It is actually for the project's own risk management to do this. And it's a good idea to have a budget allocation, not just on the environmental side, but also on the social side, and particularly to think about what it costs to have the involvement of social scientists, involvement of community leaders and others, because it's going to lead to an improved project design. That's really the bottom line. Thanks.
And I just want to follow up on that comment. We certainly saw it in today's case presentation, but this idea of early, broad participation of stakeholders from a wide range has really come up in every single one of the principles we've looked at, even, you know, the earliest principles on strategic planning, which are mostly done at the national government levels. And, you know, individual practitioners may not be key to setting government strategic plans, but yet all these presentations have shown that we're more successful when you do this broad, inclusive participation early and often. And it just seems to be the recurring theme. If there's one theme that we've heard every month, I think it would be that. So I think we have time for one more question or comment from anyone, and then we're going to have to wrap up because we're almost it's at the half hour for us, but I know in India it's at the top of the hour because you all are a half hour off.
No, Elizabeth, it's not that late. It's about 8 o'clock in the evening, so it's okay.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, a big thank you to both our really fantastic presenters, and congratulations on this wonderful work. And my final little comment is, it was great to see that this whole idea came out of watching television. Just saw something on television and realized, wow, this is what we need. And so really terrific. So please, everyone, have wonderful holidays for those who are celebrating a new year. And we will see you all on the 12th of January. We've got another really interesting sort of shifting to local employment, which is obviously a simple step from some of the stuff we were looking at today, but extremely important in having successful, sustainable infrastructure. So thank you for joining us. We will see you next month.